So the new season of Arcane came out this year, and for the last 2 weeks I've been seeing nothing but actual crash dummy behavior from people with different takes and opinions on this show. And while I plan on reserving the majority of my analysis of the show for a broader video where I discuss the socio-political themes more deeply, this video is reserved for one of my more niche and pressing frustrations. I don't like Caitlyn and Vi as a ship. In other words, I don't like the idea of these two characters being placed in a relationship. Now, in the game League of Legends that the show is based on, these two have been an implied couple for a very long time. When Season 1 of Arcane dropped, I saw the writing on the wall despite not being into League of Legends. From the jump, it was clear on some level that these two were inevitable. My take at the time was that these two were clearly being shipped together, or at least for the time being they were, and I wasn't compelled even then. Caitlyn and Vi as a couple doesn't work for me for a number of reasons, between Vi's trauma and the character we've been presented with as Vi, Caitlyn's own internalized prejudice and her role as an enforcer, and her character arc this season especially. This relationship not only never compelled me, but is actively a bit character-breaking from a writing standpoint, if we're being totally honest, toxicity aside. I won't claim that it's impossible for this ship to work, but for the ending we got to work, and not read as a negative character progression for Vi, things would have to be changed. By the way, spoiler alert for this video, this is the only spoiler alert you're going to get. Before I get deeper, let me preface this by saying that my own real-life experiences with police are absolutely a factor in my opinion. I'll say I'm not trying to shame people who enjoyed this ship for the most part, and I'm not trying to say this show is bad because of it, even though I find aspects of this most recent season upsetting and a bit fun-killing for me because of the way that this played out. You're ultimately allowed to ship whoever you want. I am, however, going to explain why this ship doesn't work for me, and I understand for a lot of people they care more about having a relationship between two lesbians on screen than anything else. I don't think that's a good or productive mentality to really have, in all honesty, but it's your right to have it. That being said, Arcane is a political commentary. The creators took inspiration from a variety of real-life political situations in order to make this world and story. Therefore, when people analyze and comment on it, they will draw parallels to real-life politics, and you cannot make a political commentary and then get upset when people do this. Especially when for many members of the audience, it's not purely fiction or a thought experiment being depicted by this show, but real-world issues and real-world violence they have actual experience with. For audience members that haven't experienced police violence, dismissing Caitlyn's role and actions as a cop is easier than those of us who have actually experienced these things. When you've been tear-gassed or beaten by cops or jailed, the experience is not the same watching this show because you're watching your actual trauma be depicted. When people analyze the show's political message with that real-life experience, they shouldn't be met with dismissals such as you're taking it too seriously. If they didn't want the show analyzed politically, they should not have made a political commentary. Additionally, I've seen some people complain that if they were a MLM ship or men-loving men ship, they wouldn't get as much hate, and I think that's demonstrably untrue for a number of reasons. For one, Kate and Vi have a notably larger fan base than any of the other ships in the show, more fanfics and more fan art. I think some of the fans are underestimating how much the cop aspect of this relationship genuinely matters to people within the lesbian community especially, and how many people didn't speak up about this in Season 1 because of fear of a bad reaction, myself included, and that fear has been validated. I've wanted to make this video for a long time, but I held off due to feeling like my own trauma and experiences were biasing me and also wouldn't be respected or understood by people who were fans of the ship. On top of all of that, if they were men, I think the abusive dynamic would be even more glaringly obvious, because we live in a society where abuse from cis women isn't really considered abuse a lot of the time, whereas people are, rightly, more likely and willing to see men as abusers, or at least take it a little more seriously, which isn't to say that's an axiom or that abuse from men is handled well or the way that it should be in our society. The bar is literally in hell and we are ruled by deeply evil, abusive men. With all of that said, let me get into my actual takes about the actual characters. My first reason for not liking them is Vi. Violet is one of my favorite characters in the show. I relate to her a lot in Season 1 especially, so she's a top tier character for me, especially since boxing is her fighting style and it's always animated beautifully. But the character we've been shown has to be broken in some ways that don't fully make sense for this relationship to work. Who is Vi? She loves her sister, she wants to protect her family. At a very young age, she watched her parents get murdered in front of her by enforcers after a protest. On top of that, she was kidnapped as a child, somewhere between 16 and 13, by a corrupt cop, and jailed with no trial for 7 years until she's about 23 years old. Nearly a decade. In Season 1, she also states that beatings from enforcers in the prison are very common. We also get some canon files released alongside the first season that detail her rather harrowing experiences in prison, including solitary confinement, injuries left untreated by guards, and the aforementioned beatings from guards. When she first meets Caitlyn, that's actually what she assumes that she's going to do. And while the show tells me that trauma is very central to her, she doesn't always act in ways consistent with that being the case. One of the most glaring issues in this relationship between Caitlyn and Vi is power, their relationship to it, and how that plays into their relationship to each other. Now, to be fair, Kate Vi can work under these pretenses. Vi having an attachment to the person who freed her from what would have been a life sentence with no trial, her imprisonment was indefinite. It does make a level of sense, but I think Vi's prison trauma is still underexplored in both seasons. We never get into the immense psychological toll that growing up in a prison for no reason other than a corrupt cop's whims would do to a person. While Vi is very active as a character in Season 1, making a lot of commentary about the political situations, taking a lot of things into her own hands, she's not only sidelined in Season 2, even when she isn't across both seasons, there are aspects of her character that it feels like we don't get to explore, especially when the story needs to push this ship. Vi has to rely on Caitlyn to free her from a cell she's in for no reason, has to work with someone who has the power to send her back on a whim. As long as the Undercity is oppressed and Caitlyn is in a position of power, they cannot really have an equal relationship. Vi being a victim of police violence is neglected as a plot point in Season 2, when in Season 1 she was one of the main characters who would point out the issue of Piltover's classism and oppression against Zaun. She only really works with Caitlyn in Season 1 to save Jinx. It's obvious why in Season 2 Vi joins the Enforcers. She feels a level of guilt over what Jinx did and feels like she has to make up for it, and also believes maybe she has a better chance of saving Jinx this way. Vi joining the Enforcers this season is not something I'm against exploring. In fact, in some ways it's done really well and it is a really compelling move for her arc. Her hesitance was interesting to see, but I feel like it was a little quickly resolved for my liking, and not in a very satisfying way. But after she leaves, we don't really get to see her talk about what she did as a cop or how she feels about it. We don't get to see the reaction from her community to her being this figure of oppression for them, when in Season 1, Vi's return to the Undercity was a fairly big deal. A lot of people recognized her and acknowledged that she was back. But we don't get to see those same people acknowledge what she's done. And this is a symptom of a broader issue with the second season, which is that it feels notably rushed, and Vi is only one character suffering from that. It's also really frustrating that we don't get to see Vi's reaction to the crackdown from Noxus, or how it affects her day-to-day life at all. She goes on this huge depression spiral bender after her and Kate break up that only lasts one montage and doesn't really tell us anything other than that she's sad about Caitlyn and Jinx. Vi last season just felt much more active in analyzing the situation around her, but not here. She doesn't look for her sister during this time period, even though that was her main motivation last season. She doesn't try to do anything for her community, even though that was a huge motivation for her last season. She just wallows, which again would be fine as a plot point and enjoyable to see if it wasn't just another Fortiche mandated music video that tells us very little other than she's sad about her ex and like pit fighting to get by. I'm not the only one who feels this way. A lot of people were really disappointed that the pit fighter arc for Vi wasn't more than just a music video. This was one of those things that needed an episode, not a montage. But at this point in the show, Vi has betrayed some of her core ideals that she stated in Season 1 by joining the Enforcers. She's also worked directly with them to commit not just acts of police brutality, but actual war crimes. Weaponizing chemical agents against soldiers and civilians is an actual war crime in real life, and in the show it should at least be something Vi expresses guilt over. I didn't mean for that to rhyme with Piltover. Especially when she should know very well that the gray, the gas they were using, isn't just a gas that makes you cough. It is actively disabling. It has lasting effects. In the montage where Caitlyn first activates it, we see her looking at medical diagrams that show the effect it has on the body. The effects of regular tear gas on the body are devastating enough already. The thing is, this isn't the first time that Vi is taken a bit out of character or not allowed to be a character in a very frustrating way. Vi grew up as a thief to get by when she was a child, but in Season 1 when Jace murders a child, she brushes it off in a way that feels so antithetical to who this person we've been presented with is, because, to quote her, "Kids die all the time down here." This feels like a stark betrayal of one of her core principles, and if the story was about Vi's slow corruption or a turn from her better ideals, I'd accept it, but it's not. It also goes against one of her character motivations, which is to live up to Vander's words, protect the family. And we know that when Vander says that, he doesn't just mean his immediate family, Vi, Milo, and Clagger, and Powder, but the entirety of the lanes. He even tells the people of the lanes that they have to work together to survive because their community is all they have. And even though he's committed a betrayal by working with the enforcers, there's a line that he won't cross, in that he will never turn in one of their own people. And again, all of this can work. It all can be part of a coherent character arc, if the intention is to write a character who is slowly betraying her original ideals. And in some ways, you can argue that that is the intention, but even if that's the case, it still feels incomplete. It still feels like there wasn't enough fleshed out in this arc, and it still feels like it was rushed through. I feel like the moment that really encapsulates my issue with Vi this season is the intimate scene between her and Caitlyn. While a lot of people enjoyed it, it was very wrong to have it happen at this point in the story, in my opinion. For one, Jinx has just told Vi that she's about to commit a final act of self-harm. She's going to... Vi knows this, and from her reaction, you'd think that as soon as she's freed by Caitlyn, presumably right after, since Caitlyn apparently knew this would happen, she would immediately go to help her sister. In fact, if Caitlyn had freed her and immediately offered to help find Jinx to save her, it would have been a huge step toward her redemption, and made what we did get a little more believable. If it had happened at a later point in the story after that, it would have been way more acceptable. But instead, they have sex in the cell where Jinx was just wallowing for whoever knows how long. Several days at least. Which, not making sense character-wise aside, is just kind of a gross place to have sex with someone you love for the first time. But like, aside from all the analysis I'm about to do, all like my personal takes, it's just a little gross. I saw one audience member try to justify the scene, saying that the reason they chose to do it instead of going to save Jinx is because Vi becomes overwhelmed with emotions, but I think that's a bad excuse. It just doesn't make any sense for the character we've been presented with, that finding Jinx, who they know is about to kill herself, wouldn't be a main priority. Everything that Vi has done up to this point has been for her sister. It would literally tie up her entire character arc and help to resolve Caitlyn's, to have them save Jinx from suicide, and even help Echo do it. All of the main people Jinx has guilt from wronging or harming coming together to save her would be a great way to tie up multiple character arcs in a single scene. It's just efficient. It also may give Echo a chance to talk to Caitlyn, who is still never seriously confronted by any character about the things that she's done this season. Another issue is Vi, and how she doesn't end up getting to be that person, who it really should have been. Vi should have been the main one to take Caitlyn to task over what's happened. I really wish we'd gotten more time to explore what Vi feels toward Caitlyn, after she proved everything Vi believed about Topside in Season 1 to be true. After she gassed the community Vander told Vi with his dying words to protect. After she nearly shot a child. Vi, a character who lost a decade of her life to false imprisonment, spent a decade of her life being abused by cops, grew up being abused by cops, was hit by her cop ex multiple times, and then watches that ex become a dictator and war criminal all at once, and is clearly disturbed by her change, but then sleeps with that same person in prison. Caitlyn has literally become the symbol of everything Season 1 Vi feared, hated, and experienced, and yet they sleep together in a jail cell. Now, the writers have stated that it happens in the prison cell as a way for Vi to reclaim her trauma, and I understand that is the point. It is still bad. For someone who spent years in a cell, being stuck in it again should be the last thing she ever wants, and would be so emotionally disturbing and disorienting that I don't think she would want to have sex. Caitlyn, if she was being considerate, would maybe at least take them to another location. But the reasoning given either way is just not good. The place where Vi spent years alone being beaten by cops is not the place for her to sleep with someone in this context, especially not the current dictator of the city, and especially not for their first time being intimate in this way together. On top of that, prisons are frequent sites of sexual violence, and it feels very wrong to use a prison in a story this way, especially when part of this story is a commentary on police violence and oppression. Character aside, I just don't want to watch a fascist dictator cop have sex with a victim of police violence in a cell. There is no writing that can make that enjoyable, especially like on a subtextual level. Something about that scene and the way it played out just really highlights the absolute power difference between them. They're in the cell where Caitlyn has sent how many people? In a cell where Vi has experienced some of the worst moments of her life. Just the difference in how they view this cell is too much of a story-breaking foible for me to get over. If I think about this scene and Vi prostrating herself literally on her knees for a dictator war criminal before going on to call herself the dirt under that same woman's nails, I start bugging. I am the friend that's too woke. I really am. I really am. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. Y'all aren't woke enough. As someone who related to Vi because of the similarity in our experiences, this completely broke my admiration for the character. And it's part of a trend of not merely taking Vi out of character, but actively degrading her from a certain point of view. At the end of the show, when Caitlyn asks Vi if they're still in this fight, meaning their relationship, and Vi says, "I'm the dirt under your nails," which is obviously on the surface her saying that Caitlyn can't get rid of her and implying that they're still very close and still together. Implicitly, from a certain point of view, what's being said is very self-degrading. And if that were intentional, it would actually be a really good line. It would be really solid writing and very chilling. A great way of communicating Vi's negative mental state and how her and Caitlyn's relationship is fundamentally unbalanced and based in a betrayal of self-love and pride. But that wasn't the intention. Also, side note, but why does Vi suddenly care about children being harmed now when in season 1 she didn't care? The entire reason the memorial attack happened is because she and Jace got a child killed. Jace murdered a child and it never comes up again. Vi's hand in that murder never comes in. Did they bury that child, or did they just leave this murdered 10-year-old corpse for his mother to find in the street? And is she really wrong for wanting to kill Jace for that? Vi feels like a prime example for the complaint that the conflict between Piltover and Zaun is never given a satisfying resolution. The fact that Vi doesn't even get to talk to Jinx later, we just go straight into the war, is really frustrating. Now let's talk about Caitlyn. I have never liked Caitlyn as a person, which isn't to say I don't like her as a character. Like, there's a divide there. There's a divide between Caitlyn, the person who I know I would never like or get along with, and Caitlyn, the character in this story, who I really enjoy for her role in the story most of the time. I actually really liked her arc in the beginning of season 2 and some of the middle episodes. Caitlyn shows a lot of signs of being capable of the fascist turn that she takes this season, back in season 1. And it felt for me like a really tragic but very organic change for her to become a fascist. And I don't mean when she gets the cape, that's just when it gets cemented. When she first assembles the Hex Cop squad, that is her moment that she turns. All Ambessa ever did to Caitlyn was accelerate what was clearly already in motion and already possible to happen, and do so to her own benefit. After making a massive deal about not using Hex Tech, this move is one of the ones that signals she's going overboard. Aside from the animals comment and some others, I think Caitlyn becoming this dictator due in part to manipulation is one of the better character arcs in the season, but it's not resolved well, and it is incredibly frustrating how it's ignored or brushed aside so that certain things can happen. For example, her, a cop, hitting Vi, a victim of police violence, and her lover, aside from being very reflective of actual relationship dynamics for those who involve themselves romantically with cops, it's just never talked about again. Caitlyn never apologizes for this specific action. Vi never brings up this specific action, even though Caitlyn didn't just hit her. She hit Vi in a spot where she knew Vi had already been injured recently and that she knew would hurt more. Which is like a level of malice that you can't just not acknowledge. She never really acknowledges using the Grey as a chemical weapon against civilians, and it is against civilians. Vi says herself it was used to clear the streets, which implies it was used against civilians to get them off the streets. In the beginning of the montage, we also see several regular people running away from it. And it's kind of disturbing also how some fans in the fanbase justify Caitlyn doing this by saying she only used it against criminals, quote unquote. For one, that category would technically include children like Vi and Powder, who were thieves, criminals. Also, legally speaking, criminals are not considered civilians by the military unless they take specific action against the military. And even if not, using chemical weapons is a war crime. You can't use chemical weapons against actual soldiers in war. And it's an absurd war crime to employ against a city that Piltover is actively, canonically occupying and engaging in crackdowns on. People really need to stop and deconstruct what the word criminal means. The word criminal is a political category that can be ascribed to anyone for anything. If you speed, you're a criminal. But if it's illegal to say that the president is a dickwad and you say that, you are also a criminal. So you can't justify certain acts of violence by just saying the person was a criminal, because one, that can mean anything, and two, criminal is, above any other term in politics, the most manipulatively used term. No other term in politics is more manipulatively used than that of criminal. All of that has nothing to do with my criticism of the show. That is just me stopping to give a little political aside to the people who are justifying Caitlyn's actions through that, because that's just an actual dangerous framework to have as a person. That is just actually dangerous. Show aside, criminality is not inherently pretense for violence, and it should not be. Because if you can do anything you want to criminals, all you have to do whatever you want to people who have never done anything wrong, or people who you actively seek to disenfranchise, is label them criminals. Back to the focal point. Vi and Caitlyn are deeply tied up in bad political commentary, and this is part of what's making both of their arcs suffer. Caitlyn's conversation with Jinx, and her scene with Vi after, while interesting, is not redemption. It's an acknowledgement and a really good way of showing how she's trying to let go of the impulses that led her here, but it's not the completion of an arc. Caitlyn basically didn't get a redemption arc, she just stopped being evil, and there's a difference. The loss of her eye is a significant step in a redemption arc, but it's too symbolic to be the actual redemption. It's only the punishment. And again, maybe she's not supposed to get a redemption arc and it's on purpose that it's not, but at the same time, if that is the intention, then it has been executed in a way that is not only uncompelling, but just badly done. For one, while it's implied that either Savika is just on the council now, or maybe, and I don't think this is true, Caitlyn gave up her family's seat, that should have been a full scene in a episode, not hinted at in the background of the epilogue. I have a very strong dislike for Caitlyn as a person, but I love her as a character, and I wish that her redemption had been given more time. We don't get enough time to explore her actions during the time she was leading Piltover, nor its broader effects on the rest of the city. We see that Zaun is ready to revolt over it, but the resolution to that is also incredibly disappointing, and ultimately to be saved for another video. She never actually did anything to materially atone for her actions. Her line toward Jinx saying, "Neither of us can make up for our crimes," is incredibly frustrating because between the two of them, Caitlyn is the only one who actually has the power to materially atone for what she's done, via her family's resources and her position. She has the most power out of anyone in the entire show to redeem herself for what she's done. Jinx also arguably redeems herself for the harm she caused in Zaun specifically. I don't think she did anything wrong to Piltover, they deserved it. But she redeems herself for the harm that she's caused to Zaun specifically by freeing them all from Stillwater, and then covering their escape single-handedly. Meanwhile, Caitlyn is never given a chance to do anything toward Zaunites that could be seen as redemptive. For Kate Vi to work, there's one thing Caitlyn needs to do at the very least, and it's quit the police force. Which, if she did that, it was not made clear enough by the show that that's what happened, and I don't think that's what happened. Speaking of which, are any of us going to acknowledge how terrifying and weird it is that Caitlyn, an unelected, low-ranking officer, can, on the force of her family's name alone, not only threaten to pull the police's funding on a whim, but also can force her untrained, random-ass girlfriend, who none of these people know, to be a cop? Does no one else find that an absurd abuse of power in an absurd system? The amount of power and influence Caitlyn has, especially as the city's sole dictator, a power we never actually see her abdicate, she absolutely can atone for what she's done, more than almost anyone in the show. And again, if she's not going to do that, that's fine, but the way that that's handled is not satisfying, and it's partly because, again, the show was rushed. The fan reaction has honestly been the most disturbing part of all of this. Firstly, let me say that anyone using bad writing to justify homophobia should be ignored. Lesbophobia is not acceptable at all in any way, shape, or form. No matter how much you may not like the ship, it doesn't matter. You don't have a right to be bigoted toward people because of their sexuality or because of the sexuality of these characters. But that bigotry aside, Kate Vi stans have been using people not liking their ship as an excuse to call Echo's voice actor the N-word and all kinds of other slurs. There's been people editing the image of the murder of George Floyd with Caitlyn and Echo. There's been a direct correlation between how people are capable of dismissing the poorly handled themes of fascism and participation in racist abuse. And frankly, if you're going to make edits of Caitlyn as an actual cop who actually murdered an actual innocent man, people have every right to make jokes about her being KK Kiraman. And a lot of this started because someone made a joke calling Caitlyn KK Kiraman, which is not only objectively funny, but it's not that weird to do. People seem upset that Caitlyn is being compared to the KKK, but the fact is she became a fascist dictator of a canonically xenophobic, classist system. The joke wrote itself, and it's not that deep. If a character is made into a fascist in a story, people will compare them to fascists in real life. Not only is that okay, frequently that is the point of a fascist character being placed in a story. You are supposed to read them as an actual fascist in real life. You are supposed to see the parallel. The writers often take inspiration from actual fascists. Even the design of Caitlyn's outfit when she becomes a fascist is directly taken from real life dictators, and that is okay. So even if you don't like the idea that some people are taking the show too seriously by comparing it to real life politics, the way that people are responding is validating that comparison. Between this and also denying that Vi was ever abused by the police or that she deserved it because she tried to escape in order to justify their ship, I start getting the feeling that some Kate Vi shippers, not all, but many, don't care about having a good story, don't care about any other characters, and honestly don't even like the characters in the ship because they don't want better writing for them. Any aspect of them that can be interesting outside of this ship is brushed aside or blatantly lied about. Anyone who dislikes the ship is called slurs and abused by a racist fan community. We cannot be so enamored with a ship in a fucking cartoon just for the sake of representation, if we can even call them that we ignore bad writing, that we enable and allow racism and homophobia in our communities, that we attack any valid criticism with fascist and racist rhetoric. Genuinely, I've never seen a lesbian ship be so defended that some of its fans, again, some, not all, it is very valid to like this ship, some of the fans of this ship have taken an actual turn toward fascism, which is another criticism I have of the show. It's so concerned with excusing and writing off aspects of Caitlyn's fascism so she can bump uglies with a victim of police violence than it is actually having an adult conversation about fascism, which is honestly a symptom of the fact that the show was made by liberals with really poor politics themselves, but that's a topic for another video. People in the fandom tend to tote Vi as an example of butch representation, and the way that meshes with her status as a cop is really bad. The idea of a butch, historically, is meant to be very transgressive. Butch lesbians used to fight the police to protect their community. Some of the people that threw the first stones at Stonewall that led to queer people having rights now were butch lesbians, fighting the police, who routinely showed up to beat them because they weren't dressed the way that women are supposed to dress, who routinely ticketed them, arrested them, and assaulted them because they didn't conform. It isn't homophobic to feel like the fictional cop and her fascist war criminal girlfriend are not good representation of what a butch lesbian has historically meant for queer communities. And I really hope no one is developing their political opinions on these real life issues from this show, because the show's politics are really bad, and Kate Vi is a prime example of why and how. And frankly, again, I'll admit I am biased. As an LGBT person, I hate the idea that we should accept the crumbs of lesbian representation we're given here, especially when one is a cop. The history of that position and the implications it bears to a global audience that has experienced the rise of fascism worldwide, a global audience that has experienced police violence in real life within the last 6 months, a global audience that has watched for the last year as an entire nation of people is oppressed and bombed and gassed by a larger, more powerful nation simply for the sake of colonialism and oppression. A global audience that has been beaten and tear-gassed and suffered at the hands of the police, fighting against that oppression. All of that is what makes it hard for me to enjoy this show, and what makes it hard for me to enjoy this ship. Caitlyn has to quit her job and give up all of her power, not just to really be redeemed, but to make the ship work and feel like it is on an even ground where a healthy love can grow. Especially when the person she loves is a victim of the violence she just inflicted both on that person and on her entire community. It would also be a fascinating character turn for Caitlyn to have her give up this power and wealth and position that she was striving for in Season 1 for the sake of love. In Season 1, she was struggling to be respected and acknowledged within the police force. To have her decide that that isn't important to her anymore would be a really powerful character moment, and it would make her one of my favorite characters of all time. Ultimately, the studio is the main source of the issues with writing. Netflix is to blame for this. The decision to shrink the writer's room didn't help anyone. And if we're being honest, every ship in the show, every arc, suffers from the exact same problems that I just outlined with Cait Vi. They feel rushed, and even where the story can make sense, we're not given all the information, visuals, or conversations and screen time for that to be the case. A prime example of this is Time Bomb. Echo and Jinx not only used to be mortal enemies, Jinx has actively murdered some of Echo's friends. We see that happen in Season 1. And I'm not saying that I don't want them to get together, but I would really like to see the conversation they have about what Jinx did to the Firelights. I would love to see the conversation between the Bat Dude that we keep seeing this season and Savika, two people they are both the respective right hands of two people on opposite ends of a conflict. Silco and Echo are literally fighting each other. Saviko is Silco's right-hand man. The Bat Dude is Echo's right-hand man. Right? But we see these two consistently being pushed together by the circumstances of the story until they're forced to work together. I would love to see an actual conversation between the two of them. Just a conversation. How do these two, who have every reason to hate each other, every reason to never work together, how do these two specifically get along? Because of the importance both of them have to their communities. With Vander and Silco gone, Savika is the next most influential figure in the Undercity. With Echo gone, the Bat Dude, whose name I can't remember, I apologize, he's forced to be the one to lead the Firelights. A conversation between them would be so fascinating to get to see. And it would also really fit with the themes of the show of trying to reconcile these almost diametrically opposed people, emotional experiences, beef. It would be really interesting to get to see that. And I don't ever want to say that the show is bad. Aspects of the writing are bad, for sure. Certain ships are bad, for sure. But the art, the music, the effort, the animation, hundreds of people who made this cannot and will not be dismissed at all. I don't want to make anyone stop enjoying a ship or aspect of the show, but we are allowed to criticize it. What's not acceptable is using racism or crying lesbophobia to deflect from valid criticisms coming from lesbians, from sapphic people, from the LGBT community. We are not obligated to accept scraps and careless writing. Ultimately, this is not all of my thoughts on the show. I'm gonna make another video on this eventually where I talk more about the specifically political aspect of it. And again, I apologize if any of this offended people. I hope that people listened through to everything I'm trying to say and express. Again, my intention is not to enable anyone's homophobia. That's not acceptable. But I do want to have an honest conversation about how I feel about this ship and why I feel that way. And I want to do so in a way where I'm not dismissing anyone's enjoyment or shaming anyone's enjoyment, but also not allowing myself to be shamed or dismissed or especially experience racist harassment because of my feelings on the show. Overall, I think we just need to have a better conversation. At the end of the day, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the season. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked this season, even if you have criticisms, type in the comments 3 things that you liked about this season, 3 things you loved, your favorite moments in the show. Type that in the comments and let's have a conversation about just the stuff we love, because we've talked enough to death about the things we didn't love, and that's okay. I hope y'all have a nice day. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, or just yell at me in the comments if you didn't, because you're gonna anyway, whatever. Have a nice day, stay safe, and I'll see y'all later.